In 1942, an Ozark trapper named Roy Garrett ran a 40-mile trap line on foot, fed a family of 7 clean through a war winter, and pulled in more cash from one season of furs than the local school teacher made in an entire year. He never bought a tag. He never carried a license. He never checked in with a single government office. He answered to nobody but the weather and his own 2 legs. Today, folks, every single step that man took would land him in front of a judge. If you're the kind of person who keeps a pantry stocked, a generator gassed up, and a go bag by the door, you already know this feeling in your gut. The skills that kept regular American families alive for 200 years didn't disappear because they stopped working. They got regulated, licensed, taxed, and quietly written out of the culture. Number 12 on this list was standard operating procedure in every farming county in this country. And now it's boxed into a narrow legal window in maybe a third of the states, with fines that start at 4 figures if you get it wrong. Number 23 was so brutally effective that Washington slapped licensing on it before it slapped licensing on almost anything else in outdoor life, and most hunters under 60 have never even heard the term. And number 1 isn't a trick, a gadget, or a technique at all. It's a whole way of reading the land that almost no American under 60 still carries in his head. Here's the part. The big hunting channels selling you scent blocker and $1,000 optics will never say plain, your great-grandfather did not fail at hunting. He was the single most efficient predator operating in his county, and he pulled it off with gear that cost less than a tank of gas costs you today. Stick around, because what follows isn't a how-to guide. It's the part of American history the outdoor industry would rather you never think about. Let's get into it. Number 25 is hand-twisted wire snaring. Before nylon cord and stainless cable ever hit a hardware store shelf, every farm boy in this country carried a coil of soft wire in one pocket and a pair of pliers in the other. A snare set along a brushy fence line for cottontails cost him next to nothing and worked every single time a rabbit ran the same trail twice, which rabbits, being creatures of habit, reliably do. The real skill wasn't the wire, it was reading the trail, the matted grass, the fresh droppings, the exact height a rabbit's head clears the loop before it feels a thing. A sharp kid could set 20 snares in one afternoon and check every one of them at dawn before he even walked to school. Today, snaring is buried under regulation. Most states demand a trapping license, a mandatory trapper education course, and specific cable diameters measured to the millimeter. In a dozen states, foot snares for fur bearers are restricted outright or banned completely. And look, the reasons behind that aren't fake. Old-style indiscriminate snares genuinely caught family pets, livestock, and animals nobody was after. But that casual roadside snare your grandfather set as a 10-year-old boy is functionally extinct in modern America, and that's worth sitting with for a second. Number 24 is the deadfall trap, and specifically the figure 4 deadfall. 3 notched sticks holding up a flat rock over a baited trigger. That was the original mousetrap, the original rat trap, and on the frontier, the original squirrel and rabbit trap rolled into one. It cost nothing. It used material lying around every farm in America, and a 6-year-old could build a working one in 5 minutes flat. Boy Scout manuals taught this trigger mechanism straight through the 1950s, then quietly dropped it from the curriculum. Modern trapping law now classifies any deadfall built to game animal size as a body gripping trap, which means it falls under the exact same heavy restrictions as commercial steel traps. The technique isn't gone. It survives in survival schools, primitive skills gatherings, and a few stubborn corners of the bushcraft world. But the easy, everyday familiarity every farm child once had with a figure 4 trigger has essentially vanished from American life. Number 23 is punt gunning for waterfowl. And this is the clearest, most justified case of illegal now on this whole list, Nothing shady about corporate interests here, just hard math on a collapsing continent. A punt gun was a massive single-shot shotgun, sometimes 2 full inches in bore diameter, mounted flat on the bow of a low, shallow boat. A market hunter would drift silent into a raft of sleeping ducks before sunup and fire once, dropping 50 or 100 birds with a single pull of the trigger. Through the late 1800s, punt gunners kept the restaurant trade in Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York stocked with thousands of birds a week. No bag limits, no close season, just open commercial slaughter. Historians researching the era found market hunters running conventional shotguns were routinely killing 150 to 200 ducks a day, even without a punt gun. And this went on for roughly half a century across the Chesapeake, the Mississippi Valley, California's Central Valley, and the marshes of Lake Erie and the Gulf Coast. By 1900, serious people in wildlife circles were openly saying ducks and geese might go the way of the passenger pigeon. By 1918, this method, combined with plume hunting for the hat trade, had gutted entire continental populations of ducks, geese, and shorebirds. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act outlawed market hunting that same year, and punt guns went down with it. You can still own a punt gun today in most states as a historical curiosity. You absolutely cannot hunt with one. North American waterfowl numbers came back specifically because of that restriction, not in spite of it, a fact worth remembering next time somebody tells you all regulation is just government overreach. Number 22 is live decoys. Before the plastic decoy industry existed in any form, duck hunters kept live mallards, clipped wing or pinioned so they couldn't fly off, tethered right in the blind as living lures. A flock of real calling ducks pulling in passing migrators outperformed any hand-carved wooden decoy ever made, no contest. Live decoys got banned federally in 1935, part of the same wave of waterfowl protection that ended market hunting outright. Nobody much argued about it at the time because live decoys had become so lethally effective that duck populations were collapsing under the pressure of it. This technique is genuinely illegal everywhere in the United States today, full stop. You'll find it mentioned in vintage hunting magazines from the 1920s and 30s, and that's exactly where it should stay. Number 21 is spotlighting and night hunting. Before high-output flashlights and night vision optics existed, your grandfather and his neighbors would slip out after dark with nothing but a kerosene lantern and a single-shot .22 rifle to take rabbits and raccoons by the shine of their eyes glowing in the dark. A patient spotlighter could fill a burlap sack in a few careful hours of walking. Spotlighting deer or any big game animal is illegal in essentially every single state today, and honestly, the reasoning holds up. It's too effective. It makes safely identifying what you're actually shooting at nearly impossible in the dark, and historically, it enabled large-scale poaching that wiped out local deer herds entirely. Spotlighting small predators and varmints under specific permit conditions is still legal in a good number of states. But that casual after-dark small game hunt your grandfather ran as a teenager is mostly gone from American life. Running hounds on deer through open timber, sometimes a full dozen dogs working one line, was flat-out standard practice across the American South clear into the 1950s. The dogs pushed deer past stationary hunters posted at known crossings, and whole communities would turn out for deer drives that looked a lot more like a medieval hunt than anything you'd call modern still hunting today. Deer hunting with dogs remains legal in a handful of southern states under tight permit conditions, is restricted in most states, and is banned outright in the majority of the country. The skill of training, handling, and reading a good deer hound is genuinely fading fast. The last generation that grew up actually running dogs on deer is now in its 70s and 80s, and when that generation passes, a big chunk of that knowledge goes into the ground with them, which is exactly why it matters to write it down now, while somebody's grandfather can still tell the story. Number 19 is the brush blind built straight out of the land itself. Modern hunting blinds are a multi-billion-dollar industry at this point. Ground blinds, tower blinds, pop-up blinds, scent control blinds, heated blinds, you name it. Your great-grandfather built his blind by bending live brush and weaving it into a screen backed against natural cover, and the result was invisible to game in a way no manufactured product has ever fully matched. This isn't illegal on most public land outright, but cutting live vegetation to build a permanent or even semi-permanent blind violates land use regulations in plenty of places. And even a temporary brush blind can run afoul of no alteration rules in wilderness areas in many state forests. The net effect is that the skill of building a blind from whatever's already growing around you, which means reading sight lines, understanding wind, and working with cover instead of fighting it, has been replaced almost entirely by buying a manufactured product and hauling it in on your back. The knowledge is the real loss here, not the gear. Number 18 is calling game by mouth, meaning traditional hand and mouth calling with no manufactured aid whatsoever. Before commercial calls took over every single aisle of every sporting goods store in America, hunters called turkeys, ducks, geese, elk, deer, and predators using nothing but their own voice and lips. The reed turkey call was a hollowed corncob and a strip of cedar slate. The duck call was a man's own throat, trained over years to mimic a hen mallard convincingly enough to fool a live bird. Elk bugles came out of a piece of garden hose or a section of bullhorn. None of this is illegal anywhere in America. It's legal everywhere. But it's nearly extinct in everyday practice simply because manufactured calls work well enough that almost nobody bothers putting in the years it takes to learn the harder skill. The old generation of mouth callers, guys who could bring a tom turkey into 20 yards using nothing but their own voice, are dying out faster than the skill can be passed down. Now here's a pattern break, because the romantic version of this history leaves something important out. Your great-grandfather was hunting in a country that had just barely pulled back from a total continental wildlife collapse, and preppers especially should sit with that fact, because it's the clearest lesson in this whole list about what happens when nobody manages a resource. The 1900 census of American game was flat out catastrophic. Bison were nearly wiped off the continent. Researchers looking back at white-tailed deer specifically found the population had crashed from an estimated 15 to 30 million animals before European contact down to roughly 300,000 nationwide by 1890, a collapse of somewhere around 99%. By the turn of the century, states like Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri had 500 deer or fewer left in the entire state, and whitetails were considered flat-out eliminated from Ohio, Illinois, Kansas, Indiana, and Iowa. Wild turkey was absent from most of its historic range. Beaver had been trapped out of entire watersheds. Elk were wiped out of everything east of the Rockies. The only reason there's game to hunt today is that one generation, roughly 1900 to 1940, made hard, unpopular choices about regulation, bag limits, closed seasons, licensing, and the end of market hunting for good. Some of those rules went further than they needed to. Some of them protected industries, guides, outfitters, license fee-funded agencies, just as much as they protected actual wildlife. But the overall arc was conservation, and it worked about as well as any government program in American history has ever worked. North America has more deer, turkey, elk, geese, and bear today than at any point in the last 150 years. Your great-grandfather's skills weren't all stolen from him by faceless bureaucrats. Some of them were willingly given up so his great-grandchildren would still have something left to hunt at all. These are skills worth remembering, and this is a trade-off worth understanding clearly before you get angry at any one rule on this list. Number 17 is snaring fish in Clear Creek water. A loop of copper wire on the end of a willow pole, lowered slow and easy behind a trout or a sucker resting under an undercut bank, can be tightened around the fish before it even reacts to what's happening. Your great-grandfather called this noosing, and he used it to fill a stringer in clear mountain creeks where nothing else worked half as well. Fish snaring is now illegal in essentially every state for game fish, with the one carve-out being rough fish, carp, suckers, gar, which can still be snagged or speared under specific regulations in a lot of states. The technique itself works exactly as well today as it did 100 years ago. The law around it is what's changed completely. Number 16 is hand fishing for catfish. Reaching barehanded into an underwater hole and hauling out a 50-pound flathead catfish is called noodling, hogging, or grabbling, depending on where in the country you grew up. And it used to be routine practice across the American South and lower Midwest. Hand fishing got outlawed in most states for decades on grounds that it was unsportsmanlike and hard on spawning catfish populations. Over the last 20 years, though, a wave of legalization has actually rolled that back. Texas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and several other states now permit it under specific regulations. So, this one's genuinely interesting. It's a lost practice that's partway coming back on its own. That said, the skill itself is legitimately dangerous. Snapping turtles and beavers share those same holes, and learning it the right way basically requires direct mentorship from somebody who's already done it 100 times. Before fish finders and pop-up tip-ups, ice fishermen across the Great Lakes states would cut a hole straight through the ice, build a small dark shanty right over it, and lower a hand-carved wooden decoy fish on a string into the water below. When a real fish, pike, lake trout, sturgeon, swam in to investigate what looked like an easy meal, the fisherman drove a barbed iron spear straight down through the hole. Ice spearing for pike is still legal today in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Vermont, and a handful of other northern states under specific season and licensing rules, while spearing sturgeon is heavily restricted to a handful of short windows on specific lakes. The Wisconsin Lake Winnebago sturgeon spear season is one of the most fiercely protected fishing traditions left standing in North America. The skill of carving a proper decoy, reading water clarity through a dark hole, and timing a spear thrust correctly is one of the most beautiful and least known traditions in American outdoor culture. It survives, but just barely. Number 14 is the pit trap for large game. A pit dug straight along a known animal trail, deep enough to hold an animal until the trapper showed up, was used by indigenous peoples across this continent for thousands of years, and got picked up by some frontier trappers well into the 1800s. By the 1940s, pit traps had essentially disappeared from American practice, and they now violate trapping regulations in every single state because they're indiscriminate, genuinely dangerous to people and livestock, and cause prolonged animal suffering. This is one case on the list where the regulation is straightforwardly humane, no argument to be made against it. It's included here purely as history. Your great-grandfather almost certainly never used one, though his great-grandfather very possibly did. Number 13 is foothold trapping for fur bearers. The steel leg-hold trap was the literal foundation of the American fur trade for 250 straight years. Beaver, muskrat, mink, fox, raccoon, coyote, bobcat, every fur bearer on the continent got trapped this way, and the income off a winter trap line was a real significant slice of rural household economics clear into the 1960s. Modern foothold trapping is still legal in the large majority of states, but it's heavily regulated. Trap dimensions, jaw spread, padded jaws, swivel anchoring, and mandatory checking intervals are all spelled out in state law down to the specification. Several states have banned leg hold traps outright through ballot initiatives, including Massachusetts, California, Arizona, Colorado, and Washington. Here's the thing preppers should really pay attention to, though. The collapse of fur prices since the 1980s did far more damage to American trapping than any single regulation ever did. When a top-grade beaver pelt went from $100 down to $15, the entire economic engine behind trapping just fell apart overnight. Money, not the law, killed most of this trade. The skill of running a genuinely productive trapline is now held by maybe 10% of the people who held it back in 1955. Number 12 is setting trot lines and limb lines. A trot line is a heavy main line strung with dozens of baited hooks suspended in deep water. A limb line is a single baited hook tied off to a flexible tree branch hanging out over the water. Both were completely standard fishing methods on every single river system in America for a solid 200 years. These methods are still legal today in many states under specific permit conditions, hook limits, tag requirements, set distances, mandatory checking intervals, while being banned or severely restricted in a number of others, particularly where game fish are concerned. This is honestly a perfect example of a practice that got regulated rather than eliminated outright. The patient skill of running a trot line at first light, knowing exactly where to set it, what bait to use, and how to read the water, has been kept alive in the regions where the tradition survived straight through the whole regulatory period. Here's another pattern break worth chewing on, and this one's about economics more than law. The decline of American hunting and trapping skill has only ever been partly about regulation. The bigger force by far has been plain economics. Hunting in 1940 meant food and income for a lot of families. Full stop. A deer fed a household for a month. A trapline paid for shoes and salt through the winter. The skill got developed because it had to, because the alternative was going hungry. Hunting in 2026 is, for most people who do it, recreation. The pressure to develop genuine field skill has been quietly swapped out for the pressure to buy gear that papers over a lack of that same skill. Scent blockers, laser rangefinders, cellular trail cameras, and $1,000 rifle scopes are all extraordinary tools in their own right. But they've displaced the slow, patient, hard-won knowledge that used to be the only thing standing between a family and an empty dinner plate. Your great-grandfather had observation, patience, calluses, and time on his side, and he was a better hunter than almost anyone alive today because his life and his children's lives were genuinely riding on it. That kind of raw necessity is gone from most American lives now, thank God, but the skill that necessity built can absolutely come back if people actually choose to build it back up on purpose. Number 11 is reading sign by moonlight. Tracking during daylight is hard enough on its own. Tracking at night is something almost no modern hunter ever even attempts. Your great-grandfather routinely read deer trails, raccoon paths, and bear sign by nothing but moonlight, partly because his daylight hours were already eaten up by work, and partly because plenty of species are simply more active after dark than before it. None of this is illegal anywhere in the country. It's just nearly extinct as an actively practiced skill. The ability to read a track by indirect light, feel the depth and freshness of a print with your fingers, and follow a line of broken grass at 3 a.m. took years of dedicated practice to build. That knowledge is genuinely hard-won, and almost nobody under 60 in America still carries it. Number 10 is bone and sinew tool making from harvested game. Before nylon existed in any form, every single part of a harvested animal had a purpose baked into it. Sinew became bowstrings and sewing thread. Bones became awls, fish hooks, and toggles. Antlers became tool handles, arrow points, and pressure flakers for shaping stone tools. Hide became clothing, cordage, and shelter material. This practice is completely legal everywhere in the country, and it's also nearly gone outside of indigenous traditional practice and a handful of primitive skills schools scattered around. The casual, everyday familiarity your great-grandfather had with what to do with every single part of a deer has been replaced almost entirely by tossing the remains in a pile behind the barn. This is honestly one of the most recoverable items on this whole list. The knowledge is well documented, the raw materials are free for the taking, and the only thing genuinely missing is the cultural memory that says it's actually worth doing in the first place. Number 9 is hide tanning with brain and bark. Here's a fact that sounds like folklore, but is straight documented biochemistry. Every mammal has roughly enough brain matter in its own skull to tan its own hide. The lecithin in brain tissue emulsifies the natural oils that preserve hide fibers, producing leather that's soft, durable, and genuinely breathable. Combine that with bark tannins pulled from oak or hemlock, and the result is buckskin that outperforms most commercial leather on the market today. The technique is completely legal, and it's also almost entirely absent from modern American practice, kept alive by a handful of primitive skills instructors, indigenous practitioners, and dedicated bushcraft hobbyists. The skill is fully recoverable for anyone willing to put in the time. A full hide tan takes several days of real physical labor spread across roughly 2 weeks, but the finished material is something no factory anywhere can fully replicate. Number 8 is smoking and drying meat without any modern equipment at all. Jerky is $1 billion industry today, but the technique underneath it is older than agriculture itself. Thin strips of lean meat hung in a smoky, low-heat environment for 12 to 36 hours produce a shelf-stable protein source that lasts months without a single hour of refrigeration, which, if you think about a grid-down scenario for even a second, is exactly the kind of skill worth having in your back pocket. This is fully legal for personal use everywhere. The skill itself, knowing what wood produces good smoke, what temperature kills bacteria without actually cooking the meat through, how thin to slice it, and how to read a finished batch just by feel, is widely documented but rarely taught the old way, meaning standing next to somebody who already knows how and watching them do it. A pound of homemade jerky from a deer your own family harvested is one of the most satisfying foods on this earth, and most modern hunters just dump their venison off at a processor and never see one single step of that process for themselves. Number 7 is tracking wounded game without dogs. Modern blood tracking dogs are genuinely extraordinary tools and legal in most states today. Before they were widely available, though, every hunter was his own tracking dog, reading blood color and pattern, droplet spacing, hair sign, the angle of disturbed leaves, and the body language of the wound itself to figure out where an animal was headed and how badly it was hit. None of this is illegal anywhere, it's just dying out fast, replaced by GPS-collared tracking dogs and cellular trail cameras posted up at likely recovery points. The patient skill of staying on a wounded animal's trail for hours, sometimes clear through the night until you finally find it, used to keep families fed when losing a recovery meant somebody in the house went hungry that week. It's one of the most ethical skills any hunter can possibly develop, and one of the most consistently neglected in modern hunting education across the board. Here's a pattern break worth sitting with, because it cuts right to the heart of why this whole list matters to a prepper mindset in particular. There's a word for what your great-grandfather had that most modern outdoorsmen simply don't, and that word is competence. Practical, total, embodied competence. The ability to walk onto a piece of land, read it correctly, harvest food from it, and bring that food home using nothing but what he already carried in his own head and his own pockets. That competence got displaced piece by piece over the decades. Some of it was necessary. The conservation laws of the early 1900s genuinely saved species that would otherwise have been wiped off the map at industrial scale, and no honest person should wish that reversed. Some of it was purely economic. Once hunting stopped being a necessity, the urgency to build deep skill simply collapsed under its own weight. And some of it, frankly, was just commerce, plain and simple. A man who can call a turkey in by mouth doesn't ever buy a turkey call. A woman who can tan her own hide doesn't buy leather from anybody. A family that can properly preserve their own meat doesn't fill a chest freezer with processed venison sticks from the store. Every one of those skills, once it was widely practiced across a community, quietly removed a paying customer from somebody's market. That's not some grand conspiracy, it's simply what markets do by nature. They expand outward to fill whatever space competence used to occupy. The only real way to push them back out of your own life is to take that competence back for yourself, one skill at a time. Number 6 is identifying edible and medicinal plants right in the hunting field. A hunter in 1942 who got turned around out in the woods could feed himself for days straight on plants growing within 50 feet of wherever he happened to stop walking. He knew the edible greens, the starchy roots, the medicinal barks, and the safe berries by sight without a second thought. He knew which plants stopped bleeding and which ones eased pain in a pinch. This is legal absolutely everywhere except inside national parks, where specific collection rules apply, and it's also nearly extinct today as a practical, everyday skill. The casual plant knowledge every farm child once carried around in his head has been replaced by the quiet assumption that you'll just get home before you ever actually need any of it. The recovery of this one specific skill is genuinely one of the most achievable items on this entire list. Local foraging classes exist in almost every single state now, and the plants themselves are still right there, growing exactly where they've always grown. Number 5 is reading weather straight from the field itself. A hunter who couldn't read incoming weather off cloud shape, wind direction, animal behavior, and shifting barometric pressure stayed out in the woods too long, got caught flat out in bad storms, lost the trail home, and sometimes lost his life over it. Your great-grandfather read the sky the exact same way you read a phone screen today, constantly and without even thinking about it. Nothing here is illegal in the slightest. The skill simply got displaced wholesale by smartphone weather apps. The result is hunters today who carry a phone straight into a dead zone, lose signal completely, and have absolutely no fallback plan for predicting the next 6 hours of weather on their own. The signs themselves haven't changed one bit. The pressure drop ahead of an incoming front still makes deer feed heavily before it hits. Cattle still lie down in the field before rain arrives. Geese still fly noticeably low when air pressure starts falling. The hunter who takes the time to relearn these old signs operates with a quiet advantage that absolutely no app on earth can replicate for him. And here's fact number 1 worth adding for this audience specifically, because it ties straight back to self-reliance. Your great-grandmother's root cellar worked on the exact same principle preppers pay good money for today in a powered chest freezer, except hers never needed a single watt of electricity to run. Dug into the ground below the frost line, a proper root cellar holds a steady 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity sitting around 90%. And that combination alone is why a well-packed root cellar could keep potatoes, onions, carrots, beets, and cabbage edible clear through an entire winter with zero power input of any kind. Certain winter squash varieties, packed right, would hold for 6 to 8 full months in one of these things. If the grid ever actually goes down for an extended stretch, that 200-year-old hole in the ground still works exactly as well as it did in 1900, and it costs nothing but the digging. A deer or elk produces several pounds of genuinely usable fat that almost every modern hunter throws straight in the trash without a second thought. Your great-grandfather rendered every ounce of that fat into tallow, which then became cooking oil, candles, leather conditioner, rust-proofing for his tools, and the base ingredient for homemade soap. This is completely legal everywhere in the country. The skill of clean rendering, low heat, careful straining, proper storage in a cool spot is documented in any old farming text you can dig up, and it's almost never taught in a single modern hunter education course today. One single mature whitetail can produce enough rendered tallow to cover a family's cooking fat needs for months at a stretch. The skill itself is recoverable in one single afternoon, and the raw fat is sitting right there inside an animal you've already harvested and likely already thrown half of away. Before the compound bow, before the recurve, before modern fiberglass laminate limbs existed at all, there was the self-bow, a single carefully chosen piece of wood, shaped by hand over the course of weeks, strung with twisted sinew or plant fiber cordage. Indigenous peoples and frontier woodsmen made these by the literal millions across 10,000 years of continuous use on this continent. The skill is legal absolutely everywhere and kept alive today by a small dedicated community of traditional bowyers, taught in primitive skill schools and documented thoroughly in some genuinely excellent books on the subject. Your great-grandfather himself likely never made his own bow. By 1942, most rural hunters were already carrying factory-made firearms, but his own great-grandfather almost certainly did make one. The raw materials cost nothing. The skill itself takes years to develop properly. The end result, in truly skilled hands, is a weapon fully capable of taking any large game animal on this continent at close range. No batteries or barcode required. Number 2 is reading game movement by season and by moon. Modern hunters increasingly lean on smartphone apps that predict deer movement using cellular tables, live weather feeds, and historical pattern data. That data is sometimes genuinely useful, sure, but the actual skill that data quietly displaces runs a whole lot deeper than any app can reach. It's a working understanding of why animals move when they move, built up over years of direct, patient, on-the-ground observation. Your great-grandfather knew exactly when the acorns dropped in his own county every single year. He knew which south-facing slopes thawed out first every February without fail. He knew which creeks held reliable bedding cover during a dry October. He knew the rut dates in his area not from any magazine article, but from watching the same 40 acres for 40 straight years of his life. This is the slow, patient kind of knowledge that no app on any phone can ever hand you, It comes purely from time spent on the actual land, and it comes from absolutely nowhere else. And number 1, the single most important entry on this whole list, the land is one single living system. And this is the fact that ties everything else together into one picture. Your great-grandfather never once thought of a hunting trip as some separate event walled off from the rest of his year. The land where he hunted was the exact same land where he farmed, gathered firewood, watched the birds come and go, read the weather rolling in, and walked with his own children. The deer he finally took in November was the same deer whose summer rubs he'd already noticed back in July, whose acorn flat he'd checked on in September, whose bedding area he deliberately avoided disturbing all year long without even thinking twice about it. This is the one thing almost no modern hunter has any real access to anymore. A weekend lease 2 hours from home, hunted maybe 4 or 5 times a year at most, will never once produce the kind of deep knowledge that only comes from walking one single piece of ground 100 times across every season of the year. The decline of American hunting skill isn't really, at its root, about regulation or commerce at all. It's about disconnection from place, plain and simple. Your great-grandfather was a competent hunter precisely because he was first a competent inhabitant of one particular piece of earth that he knew inside and out. This is knowledge that no license fee can sell you, and no piece of gear, no matter how expensive, can ever hand you. It's also the one piece of knowledge on this entire list that no regulation anywhere can ever legally take away from you, because nobody in Washington or any state capital ever managed to pass a law against simply knowing your own land. That part is still sitting there, free for the taking. It always has been and it always will be. So here's what I want you to actually do with this, and I mean this straight, no fluff. Pick one single entry off this whole list, just one. Don't try to tackle all 25 at once. Don't go buy a single piece of gear yet. Pick a piece of land you already have legal access to, a hunting lease, a state forest nearby, a relative's old farm, or your own backyard if that's genuinely all you've got available, and spend one full weekend this month walking it slow. No phone in your hand, no app running, just your own 2 eyes and ears doing the observing. Then come back here and tell the rest of us what you actually noticed out there. Drop a comment and tell me which skill on this list you picked for yourself. Tell me if anyone in your own family ever ran a trap line, ran hounds on deer, or hand fished for catfish down south. Because I will promise you this much, that knowledge is sitting quiet in somebody's memory just 2 generations back in your own family tree, and it does not have to die out right there and disappear for good. That knowledge never actually died in the first place. It just went quiet. And quiet, folks, is not the same thing as gone. Hit that subscribe button if you want more of exactly what they stopped teaching 2 generations ago. Your great-grandfather knew all of this cold. You can know it too, starting this weekend if you actually want to.